Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Friday Digest, Maryland LCV's Friday 30 Minutes with You. The purpose of these discussions is to really provide you with information, inspiration, and anything you need to be able to take action on behalf of the climate, the environment, and justice. I'm Kim Coble. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and I'm honored to spend the half hour with you. I'm also delighted to introduce my friend and brilliant Susan Miller, who is with Earth Justice and has been a great colleague over the years with us and for us. And I'll introduce her a little bit more in the moments ahead. So our goal is to get you the information you need so you can take action. There's a couple ways for you to convey that to us. At the end of this webinar, there is going to be a survey in there. Tell us anything you need to hear, want to hear, questions that are going through your head, something you need from us that'll help enable you to take action. So that's a great place to convey that information. Also, please put your name and where you're from in the chat. We like to keep track of who's here and how we can stay connected with you. So please do that. And if you have any questions as you go along, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we'll try to get to them at the end of the session. So that's the best way to do that. So I believe that's all my housekeeping things. Today we're talking about a very timely topic. Things are moving on a bill as recently as about 2 hours ago. So this is the reason to join Friday Digest is you're getting up-to-date, really critical information as timely as possible. And the topic is data centers. And as we live in this world of the digital age, right? We all need data and we all rely on it. We want the Zoom to start on time. We want to make sure our photos are saved. We want to make sure we can do compilations. It's critical and nobody's debating the importance of that. We want, in order for that data to be stored and to function, we need data centers. There's sort of a misnomenclature about the cloud, giving everybody the impression that the data is just out there somewhere. The data is actually stored on servers, in buildings, in data centers. And so as we rely more on the digital communication mechanisms, we need more data centers. And so the question at hand is, how do we bring data centers to Maryland and continue to support our climate and justice and economic development goals? So as I said, I'm really pleased to have Susan Miller join us today. Susan has a lot of history in the energy field, both from the regulatory standpoint as well as the advocacy standpoint, and has been with Earth Justice for years now, but a fabulous resource. And I'm really pleased she could join us. So welcome, Susan, to Friday Digest.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we are too. And so for those of you that are kind of on the wonky side, I'm talking about Senate Bill 474 and House Bill 579. They're deemed the Critical Infrastructure Streamlining Act of 2024. We have been calling them the data center bill because really that's the biggest implication of these bills. The legislation is actually a double-edged sword. There are parts of it that allow economic development in the data field to move forward in Maryland. And I want to make it really clear that Maryland League of Conservation Voters is not opposed to data centers being built here in Maryland. And we appreciate the job creation during the construction in particular. We appreciate the opportunity for new technology to come to Maryland. And we appreciate the opportunity for the industry to be built. We need them, as I said. The other side of the sword, though, is that how these are built is critical. And we have a great case study in our friends to the south in Virginia. There's over 300 data centers having been built, and many more proposed to be built in Virginia. And they were not prepared for that kind of growth. And as a result, this year in Virginia alone, there were 17 bills introduced to make some course corrections in the process of bringing those data centers on. And also mitigating some of the impacts that come from really high energy use systems, high water use systems, and frankly, noisy systems. And so we look at what's going on in Virginia and we say, come to Maryland, but we want to do it in a much more sustainable manner. And that's really what we're talking about here as the background. So um, so let me turn to Susan here and just building some basics for everybody to understand. Susan, describe maybe in a little bit more detail what a data center is, how it works, and why we need them.
Well, a data center is actually just as the name applied. It's a huge warehouse just filled with computers and cooling equipment for those computers that store everyone's data in a separate space so that if something like if something happened to LCV's computers and you lost everything, you would contact the data center and they could retrieve your data for you. So that's what it is. It's a huge storage place, a huge warehouse just full of computers and equipment necessary to make those computers run.
Awesome. And the bill calls it the critical infrastructure bill. And is there a differentiation between a critical infrastructure and a data center?
Well, what I find interesting is it called it critical infrastructure, and not only did it not define critical infrastructure anywhere in the bill, if you look at the bill, nowhere else in the bill but the title does it use the name critical infrastructure. So
Mm.
to me, a cynical person might think that that was used in the title to make legislators think, oh, this is really vital and important, we have to pass it. In the same way utilities use the name reliability every time they want something passed. But critical infrastructure tends to be things that you seriously cannot do without a disruption to the economy, possibly a disruption to national security and things of that nature. It's essentially kind of what we have to make sure is there all the time. So I think data centers in general, it may be kind of an exaggeration that, no offense, but if my data is lost, it's critical to me, but it's not critical to the nation. So I think critical is probably an exaggeration for a lot of the data that data centers house, though it is critical to the companies that ask them to house it there.
And I think, I guess for us, we can discern that the bill is really about data centers, and that title might be a little bit of a misnomenclature um, or not. But what we're talking about in this bill is data centers, even though that's not in the bill either. So, can you tell us a little bit about what the bill does?
What the bill does is currently any generation station over 2 megawatts and below 70 megawatts can go through a what's called a commission and CPC and exemption process. Essentially, the commission determines that they don't need a full-blown certificate of need process, and it takes a couple of months and you can get approval to operate your generation station. It still includes MDE, MEA, and PVRP and OBC and staff all in that determination. If you're over 70 megawatts, then you have to go through the full CPCN process, meaning there's a much more evidentiary process. People question your assumptions about things and things like that. And so what this would do is totally remove emergency generators, regardless of their size, from the commission process whatsoever. And they would simply get a MDE air permit and not have to go through and any other permits but they would not go through the one-stop shop. They would not have the protections that are afforded for particularly over 70 megawatts, like having the applicant have to have a community liaison to work with people in the community to let them know what's happening. They would not have to have, under the current Maryland rules, anyone within a mile of the facility has to receive direct notice that there's been a request for a facility. So all that would go away because the commission essentially would no longer have any jurisdiction over these projects.
And just to be clear, there's the data center. And as we've talked about, we need these data centers to operate, and they need to continue to operate. So they include backup generators, right? So they
That's
can,
correct.
in case the energy goes down, the line goes down, or there's equipment failure, there's these backup generators. And what we've learned from Virginia is that one data center, and mind you, Virginia has 300 plus, but
Mhm.
one data center has, 170 backup generators. So the this is not a small interpretation of use, right? There's 170 backup generators per data center. And the Public Service Commission would have no purview over all 170 backup generators. Is that correct?
That's correct. And a number of data centers will actually have more than the 170. Just for
Okay.
example, the aligned proposal that kind of seems to have kickstarted this whole thing, the one that was before the commission, their
Uh-huh.
first phase of their project was 168
Mm,
3 megawatt
okay.
generators. And that was
Okay.
one phase of 5. So you
Mm.
assume that even if they just had exactly the same, that would ultimately involve 840 3 megawatt generators
And that's
for that
again
one
for
company.
per
Yeah.
project, right? So these backup generators, so everybody understands, they think about if you have a generator when your power goes down, right? It's diesel, generally diesel operated, and you fire them up to keep the power going at your home, your business, your data center. And they emit greenhouse gas emissions because they're fueled by diesel. Now, one would hope that the energy doesn't go down very often and maybe once every few years. So, really, is it that big of a problem? The thing that's critical is that these backup generators need to be adhered, an operating and maintenance procedure needs to be adhered to for each backup generator. And generally speaking, they need to be fired up once a month for an hour, and that to just make sure that they're operating correctly. So again, when you start doing the math, you've got would you say 850
Mhm.
generators for this project, each of those being fired up 1 hour each month. You can tell that this starts to really add up. And what the Public Service Commission said is that we're not going to exempt those sources of these backup generators from our review process. And what the administration is asking is that there is an exemption from the Public Service Commission review process for those backup generators. We, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, supported the bill with amendments. So we felt that if we could get some assurances that those emissions would be offset or that the impacts from those emissions would be addressed, that perhaps we could get the bill into at least a less harmful position. And the Senate committee voted yesterday to voted the bill out with some amendments that we're supportive of, and we're grateful for those amendments, but nothing speaking to the greenhouse gas emissions from the backup generators. So we sent a letter this morning expressing our opposition to the bill unless there's some amendments added that really get at these emission reductions or the impacts of it. Um, so it's unfortunate, but that's our legislative process, and here we are. So, Susan, let me take a step back a little bit again, and talk to us a little bit more about Virginia and what they have learned and some lessons that we can pick up from them. And I know you've tracked that, so can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit to their experience?
Well, Virginia allowed growth of data centers with absolutely no controls whatsoever. And I believe Loudoun County probably close to or does have the most data centers in the world in one place right now.
Yeah.
And what they've discovered is these data centers use massive amounts of energy. Most one data center, if it's a large campus, can use the same amount of energy as a small to medium-sized town.
Mm,
So what has happened in Virginia is one, Dominion Energy, which serves the area, 20% of the energy they sell now goes to solely to data centers.
mm,
It's not
mm,
available for anyone else. And Dominion Energy has stated there was a fossil fuel power plant that was scheduled to be closed down. And not only has Dominion stated they're no longer going to close that because of the data center load, they now are going to ask permission to build another 1,000 megawatt gas fire generation in in Virginia. So what it's doing is it's using so much energy, it's causing utilities to change their plans with regard to getting rid of fossil fuels and replacing it with renewable energy and energy efficiency and demand response. The other thing it's doing is it's increasing, the costs are spread among everyone, even though data centers are the only entity that's generating these costs. So more transmission lines, which someone described it as simply an extension cord for the data centers, that it doesn't help anyone else because we need more transmission lines for renewables. But this is just like an extension cord so data centers can get more power. It raises rates. I mean, once they don't get rid of this fossil fuel plant and they build a new plant, it will raise rates for everyone because that
Hmm.
cost of that plant will be spread among everyone, even though it's only really needed for this one entity. And there's no noise restrictions. And what it's been described to me is living near this is like living next to a 747 that's constantly turned on, getting ready to take off, but it's just sitting there. You know, they run 24/7, so this noise is 24/7. And so because they were
Hmm.
built without any restrictions, they weren't even required to do noise buffers or anything like that. And also, while it wasn't Virginia, in Illinois and Chicago alone, they receive dozens of notices of air violations every year from the EPA that they're simply
Hmm.
not controlling their air emissions as they're supposed to under the current law. So
Hmm.
it causes a vast number of things, and it particularly is concern for ratepayers who are going to end up having to pay a lot of money for these entities to get the power that they want.
So, well, yeah, that's disturbing news all the way around. So, just to emphasize this, and we've gotten a question about this, the energy requirements of these data centers is really exorbitant. You're saying that the statewide, there's got to be a 20% increase in energy production just for these data centers. That's in Virginia.
Well, that
Did I
wasn't
hear
even
that correctly?
statewide. That was just in Dominion's
Oh,
service territory. So that doesn't
okay.
include if there are any other data centers anywhere else in Virginia that are also using power.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
you know,
Okay. Um, so is Maryland equipped to handle that increase in energy needs?
I would say no, just because there's already transmission constraints in Maryland, as everyone knows. And we've already been trying to get new transmission to help renewables. So they're not going to have the transmission necessary to get these power to these data centers. And since this is going to happen much quicker, probably, because they're building as quickly as they can, we're not going to have the generation available to them as renewable generation at
Hmm.
the time they're ready to get started. So just like in Virginia, that's going to mean we're going to ramp up using the fossil fuel generators, and probably the utilities are going to ask to build more of them, or at least not retire ones that are scheduled for retirement.
So that, if I'm understanding this correctly, that's a timing problem, right? That, in other words, we could develop a whole data center industry 100% based on renewable energy,
Yes.
right? But we unfortunately, our renewable energy systems are not in place. So we haven't built our offshore wind and our solar is way behind. So right now, they can't be 100% renewable
Yeah.
based, correct?
Now I should stress, they claim they can't use renewables for backup. Now, no
Oh,
one's
right,
tested
right,
that.
right.
This is just the power that they use every day from a utility. And that is correct that there's just not enough renewable right now for them to use 100% renewable. But what's interesting is if you think about it, all these data centers are giant warehouses with flat roofs.
Mm-hmm.
So they're
Mm-hmm.
perfect places for solar panels. But of course, there's no law that makes them install any solar panels.
Right. Yeah. And I had heard that it's difficult to put solar panels on the roof because the temperature of the data center is critical, right?
Mhm.
You can't overheat or underheat these data centers, and so there's some limitations there. But again, kind of pulling back to the 10,000 foot level, the way we see this industry is that okay, we're all dependent on it, we all use it, so let's make sure these systems are built, this industry comes to Maryland as a partner, and that we can work with them to meet our climate goals, we have most aggressive greenhouse gas emission goals in the country.
Mhm.
Why would we need them to be a partner in meeting those goals, and we need them to help support our renewable energy goals, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that there's some room to, and this is the Maryland League of Conservation Voters' position on this bill, that we can advance. We can um, bring this particular industry here. We can ensure they have backup generation because we don't want them to go down. And the uh, and we can help expedite the permitting process, but we have to have some conversations about offsetting the additional pollution, the additional energy use that's in play, or that would be used by the center. And that remains our position. The coming full circle, the bill was heard by the Senate committee, so we'll be going to the Senate floor sometime soon, um, within the next few days, and then the bill will go over to the House, and the House will then vote on it as well. So there is still opportunity to include some adjustments and allow the industry to come to Maryland, and ensure that they have an expedited process to get themselves built. So I think that we believe that you can have an industry and you can protect our climate goals, and that's been our position. Your legislators need to hear from you on this one, truly, that we definitely need you to take some actions, specifically contacting your senators immediately and your House members as well, and just ask them on Senate Bill 4742 to make sure that the climate goals are amended into the bill. Actions to support the climate goals are amended into the bill. So if you need more information and details on that, it'll be on our website. Um, so Susan, let me just kind of, as we wrap up here, go back and uh, give me, from your long history with the Public Service Commission and energy sources in Maryland, where do you think we are? I mean, do you feel that we can um, meet our climate goals and advance good industries and renewables? I mean, are you hopeful day to day about that?
Well, it depends on the day. Um,
Fair.
yeah, I think particularly with regard to data centers, we're just at the beginning of the enormous data centers in Maryland. So we have a good opportunity to have it designed in a way that can achieve both. In our opposition to the Senate bill and the House bill, what we put in is the legislature needs to examine best practices before these are built everywhere. Virginia's in a tough place. They've already got thousands of them, and the horse is already out of the barn there, and it's very difficult to regulate people. It's more difficult to regulate people after they're already there and operating. But we have the opportunity to determine, what can we do that's a best practice that would still enable these data centers to operate and to make money. Data centers are famous for having horrible energy efficiency. They just don't care about it. So that's one thing we could do with the industry to examine what steps you can do for energy efficiency that will reduce the amount of energy you're using in the state of Maryland, which will save you money and also help with the climate goals. The other thing is that when a line asked for a rehearing of the commission's order saying they couldn't have an exemption from the CPCN, they offered to purchase RECs to
Mm,
try to balance out at least some of the effects of using the diesel generators.
okay.
There's no reason a data center couldn't be required to purchase a certain amount of RECs on the market so that they can offset what the problems are causing with us achieving their climate goals. So there's a number of things that we could examine in a best practices setting that we could ultimately require the data center to do and involve them in the discussion.
Right. Right. And our hope, by the way, RECs, renewable energy credits, for those listening. And, our hope is that the administration, the Maryland General Assembly is interested in that conversation. And, we'd like to begin the conversation on this bill and not
Mhm.
delay that conversation until next session. Um, so that's where we want to join in that conversation too, but we want it to start now. So we have just a couple minutes, and let me try to hit a few questions just real quickly. Yes, data centers have to get a Title V permit. So that is still important, and it does provide some review, some public comment, some evaluation, some limitation of pollution, um, but not. But the Public Service Commission supplants that. There's additional
Mhm.
considerations and input opportunities that the Public Service Commission process allows that will not be included in the Title V. So there
Yeah,
is a
and if
loss
I
there.
could stress, the other benefit to residents of that is if you have to get a CPCN, you get all your permits in one place. So people who are interested in the issue only have to go to one agency and one proceeding and can discuss everything. If they're not
Great
in the
point.
CPCN process, you have to go to MDE, you have to go to local jurisdictions. Wherever they get a permit from, if you want to discuss it, you have to show up at that agency. So it makes it much harder on residents to actually be able to participate in the discussion because it's all over the place.
Yeah, very good question. A very good point. Susan, real quickly, why is the PJM allowing interconnection for such large users?
PJM interconnection
Well,
process, in my view, is broken. I mean, it
okay,
essentially, and they're not supposed to make judgments. If you want interconnection and there's transmission available, you get interconnected. If you want interconnection and transmission is not available, then they have to go through the process of approving a transmission line. That's what happened in Virginia. I don't know if all of you saw the OPC press release objecting to the fact that Maryland's going to pay part of the cost of that transmission line, that all the benefits go to Virginia. So, PJM is not in the business of making those kind of judgments. You want a transmission line, we figure out how to do it. You want interconnection, if the transmission line space is available, we figure out how to do it. They don't make any judgments with regard to whether there's another reason why someone shouldn't be connected up.
okay. We are unfortunately out of time. Great questions. And this is a live topic. I am not kidding you. Contact your senator today. And I know on our website, we have some information that can help give you the language and the bill numbers and everything you need, or else reach out if there's something else. Couple of quick advertisements before we head out is March 22nd, we are hosting a tour of the State House. This is something that we did with our board. They loved it. It was a great way to connect the building, the history, and what happens in that place with people that are engaged. And so we would love for you to join us. You can get that information on our website or reach out to us. Also, March 13th, our partners are holding, and we will be there holding hands as well on the Empower Bill. March 13th, HB 864 is the Empower Bill, and there's going to be a rally. So come down, enjoy the celebrating that bill and hopefully getting that through. It's a real critical bill. Lastly, next Friday is we're going to talk about crossover, and we have a long history on this topic because one of our colleagues makes a crossover cake, and I'm really hoping she brings it in on crossover. But next Friday we'll be talking about where bills are, the status, what's moving, what's not, and again, where we need your help. We can't do this without you. So thank you for joining us. Complete the survey at the end, and we will see you next week. In closing, Susan, thank you. You've
Thank you
been
for
great.
inviting me.
It's been fun to have you. Take care, everybody.